welcome to my channel, Patterns by D. My name is D, and today's tutorial is on the Sassy Sweatsuit. Now, before we get started, can you hit that subscribe button and that notification bell for upcoming videos and tutorials? Okay guys, this pattern is such a beginner-friendly pattern. It has 13 pieces, and you can wear it off the shoulder, you can wear it off of both shoulders. You can also wear it as a boat neck. So it's all up to you how you want to style it. I like it off the shoulder. It's a little bit sexy, loungy type of two-piece sweatsuit. You can wear it, you know, out and about, on a plane. It's just nice. It's a loose fit sweatsuit. You can make it tighter if you like, depending on if you want to go down a size. It does come from sizes extra small to 5 extra large for women. You will get 3 different sizes with your purchase. You can get extra small to medium, large to 2X large, or 3X large to 5X large. Now, the choices of fabrics that you can use for this pattern are any type of fabric that has a nice stretch to it, because this is a loose fitting type of pattern. Now, you can choose fabrics from a sweatshirt fleece, a regular fleece, a jersey knit, a cotton velour, a rib knit type of fabric, a terry, a French terry, a polyester, or, you know, like I said, even a lightweight denim if it has a little bit of stretch to it. But I just love this pattern. It's so relaxing. I have a fabric that I purchased from Joann's. It has a cable knit design on the fabric. It is a stretch knit. It comes in various colors. Notions that you would need for this pattern: you would need an 1.5 inch wide elastic for the bodice, and you would need 2.5 to 3 inches wide elastic for the pants waistband. Now, I would always wrap the elastic around my waist and stretch it a little bit to see how loose or tight you would like the elastic, and I would add a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the ends of the elastic. So that's where I'm going, you know, where I'm going to seal the elastic closed. So that's what I do to my elastic. Now, you will also need a 2x2 square of interfacing to put on the wrong side of the waistband, so you can add your buttonholes, or you can use 1/4 inch wide grommets, and you would need 2 of those. Now, if you're going to use a stretch fabric, you should also use a 75/11 gauge needle for your sewing machine, and make sure your stitching is on a 3.0 or 3.5 millimeter stitch, so you can have some give between each stitch when you're using stretch fabric. So after you get finished putting this pattern together, I would love to see your makes. You can hashtag Sassy Sweatsuit, or direct message me at Patterns by D so I can see what you make. So with further ado, let's get started. Now, I have cut all 13 pieces of the pattern, and I also made sure I put all my markings in the right places, which are my dot seam allowance markings of a 1/2 inch. The fabric that I chose also was a rib knit, cable knit fabric. It has a cable knit design on it, and I purchased this from Joann's. And the first piece is pattern piece number 1, which is the front bodice. You have to cut out 1 on the fold. Pattern piece number 2 is the back bodice, and you also cut 1 on the fold. Pattern piece number 3 is the right sleeve, and you cut 1 of these on the fold. Pattern piece number 4 is the sleeve cuff, and you'll cut 2 pieces of fabric if you like, if you want both of your cuffs, if you want both of your sleeves to have a cuff, or if you want one of your sleeve to have the tie band, which is pattern piece number 5, and you will cut 1 of these on the fold as well. All right, pattern piece number 6 is the neckband, and you'll cut 1 of these on the fold. Pattern piece number 7 is the bodice, the front bodice waistband, and you'll cut two of these on the fold. Pattern piece number 8 is the back bodice waistband. You'll cut 2 of these on the fold as well. Number 9 is the front pants, and you'll cut 2 pieces of fabric. Pattern piece number 10 is the back of the pants, and you'll cut 2 pieces of fabric for this piece as well. Pattern piece number 11 is the pocket, and you'll cut 2 pieces of fabric and 2 pieces of lining. Pattern piece number 12 is the front pant waistband, and you'll cut 1 of these on a fold. And the pattern piece number 13, the last piece, is the back pants waistband, and you'll cut 1 of these on a fold as well. Now, first step we're going to do after you finish putting all your markings, all your notches in the right places, we're going to work with pattern piece number 1, which is the front bodice, and pattern piece number 2, which is the back bodice, and you should have cut 1 of each on a fold. I'm working with size medium. And first we're going to attach the front and the back pieces at the shoulder seams. So with right sides facing, you're going to take both pieces and lay them on top of each other. And you're going to pin the shoulder seams and stitch a 1/2 inch seam allowance on both sides. Now, before you get started, you always want to make sure you're using the right gauge stitching needle for any garment that you're going to work with. I'm working with a stretch type of fabric, so I'm going to use the 75/11 gauge needle to sew my garment together. And also make sure you change your length stitch for any stretch fabric. I turned mine to 3.5 millimeter length so I can have some stretch in between each stitch. And you want a back stitch. And back stitch at the end. And I'm going to use a serger to get some of this excess seam allowance off, and also enforce my seams a little bit better as well. Okay, now that you have attached your front and back bodice together at the shoulder seams, I did a little top stitching so I can secure my seam allowance down on the wrong side. And I also serge my seam allowance together. You can press your seam allowance flat if you like. It's up to you. Now we're going to work with pattern piece number 3 and pattern piece number 5, which is the left sleeve, the right sleeve or the left sleeve. Now it's your option to do 2 sleeves with the cuff, or use the sleeve that has the tie on it for 2 sleeves. It's all up to you. You can hack it however you like. I'm just going to use 1 sleeve of each. So I just cut each pattern piece on the fold of the fabric. So now we're going to take this sleeve with right sides facing, and we're going to pin at the notches at the front bodice and pin at the notch at the back bodice of the sleeve. And then we're going to find the center of the sleeve and match that with the shoulder seam. And now we're going to match the dots at the underarm part where you find the dots, and you're going to match your dots. And then you're going to stitch across from front to back 1.5 inch seam allowance. And you're going to do that for both sleeves. Now I had on my walking foot earlier, but I'm going to change that because I had a little bit of difficulty pushing my fabric through. So I'm going to use my non-stick slip. One of these feet would do just fine, but it gives it a smoother surface to guide my fabric through a little bit better. So let's see if this one works a little better. So now we're going to stitch our sleeve. All right, back stitch at the dot at the underarm sleeve and go all the way to the other dot. Oh yes, much better. If you see how it just glides, it feels so much better with the I think it's called a non-slip. Number 13, the non-stick foot. Yeah, it has definitely a smooth, you see how shiny this surface is? So yeah, works a whole lot better. It just glides through, yes. So you're gonna use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And after I stitch this, I'm going to use my serger to give it a more secure finish. And at that dot at the other end, just back stitch at the other dot. Okay. So now you can press your seam flat or you can serge it. Now, when you press your seams flat, you can serge all the ends of your fabrics if you're going to press your seams flat. I didn't do that because I chose to, after stitching my pieces together, I was going to serge them. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, now that you have attached both sleeves using the flat method on both sides, now the sleeve that has the ties at the wrist, you're going to serge them from each side of each tie all the way up halfway to the notch on both sides. So you're going to serge from notch all the way around to the other notch, and then come back and we'll continue. And now that you have serged your pattern piece number 5 that has the ties, and you serged from notch all the way around each tie to the other notch, we're now going to close in our sleeve by sewing a 1/2 inch seam allowance from the side seam of the bodice, the front and back bodice underneath the arm, to the dot that you have marked at the end of your sleeve before your ties. And that was for pattern piece number 5. Now for pattern piece number 3 that doesn't have the ties and you're going to add a cuff, you're just going to attach from close the sleeve in by attaching the side seam underneath the arm all the way into the wrist of your sleeve. And do that, come back, and we'll continue. And you're going to stitch a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You're going to back stitch. Stop at the underarm and pivot so you can go down your side seam. And I'm going to serge my seams, or you could you can press your seams open. And do the same thing for the other side. Okay, now when attaching pattern piece number 5 that has the ties, where the dot is at the very top of the tie, that's where you're going to place your needle through that dot. And you're going to stitch using a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way to the end of your side seam. And you're going to back stitch at the dot. And at the underarm seam, you're going to lift up your pressure foot and pivot your fabric so you can go down the side seam. You're going to back stitch. Okay. Now I'm going to serge my seam all the way to the side seam. Now that you have attached both of your sleeves, now we're going to attach the pattern piece number 7 and pattern piece number 8, which is the front and back waistbands, to the front bodice. Now you can always determine what is the front bodice and what is the back bodice. If you want to put a marking for front and put a marking for back, that's fine too. But I always go with how the front neck drops lower than the back. And we're going to start with the front bodice first. Now you're going to take pattern piece number 7 and pattern piece number 8, which is the front and back waistband of the bodice. But first we're going to take pattern piece number 7. You should have cut 2 pieces of fabric on the fold, and you're going to, with right sides facing, open them up, and you're going to attach the tops. Going to attach them together and stitch one side all the way across using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And you're going to do the same thing for the back bodice waistband pieces as well. You're going to take both with right sides facing and stitch using a 1/2 inch seam allowance across one side, just one side, not both sides, but just one side of each band. You're going to stitch across one side of the front bodice waistband, both pieces together, matching on right sides together, and you're going to stitch a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, you're going to do the same thing for the back bodice pieces. Okay. So this is the back and this one's the front. Okay, now that you've sewn both of your pieces of the front bodice waistband together using a half an inch seam allowance with right sides facing, we're going to take, and you should have did the same thing with the back piece of the back bodice waistband. We're going to take it and we're going to attach them with right sides facing. Match the seam allowance, and you're going to match the notches of the side seams on one side, but for the other side seam. Okay, now you're supposed to have transferred 2 dots from pattern pieces number 7 and number 8 of the waistbands, and between these 2 dots, that's where you're going to insert your elastic. So from the edge to the first dot, you're going to stitch. Then you're going to leave that opening in between those 2 dots, that space that's maybe 2 inches apart. You're going to leave that open. Then from the second dot, you're going to stitch from that dot all the way across the side seam of the waistband. Okay, we're going to stitch half an inch from the edge to the dot. Back stitch. Cut your thread, and then stitch again. Back stitch. Okay, see, that's where we're going to put our elastic through. And then we're going to have to hand stitch this, slip stitch it closed later. So now we're going to stitch the other side of the side seam of the band all the way across using a half an inch seam allowance. Make sure that's underneath there really well. Stitch all the way across. Okay. Now, after attaching both bands, the front and back bodice waistbands on the side seams, don't forget where you placed your markings. You can also, I guess, place them on the front so you can see what where the front and back go, because you're going to fold the bands together with wrong sides facing, and you're going to do an edge stitch across the band to seal the band closed. And let me mark this for back, or you can just leave a dot, or you can leave a dot or a marking so you'll know where to pin the bands to the front and back bodice. Now I'm going to edge stitch these closed. Now to edge stitch, you're going to stitch 3/8 of an inch from the edge of the front bodice waistband, starting at the seam allowance, the side seam, You're going to stitch all the way around. Stitching it all the way closed. Stitch it 3/8 of an inch. Back stitch. Okay, now that you have attached your front and back bands, bodice bands, waistbands closed, using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance to do an edge stitch, now we're going to attach our band to the front and back bodice pieces. Feed it inside. And I'm going to attach my side seams first. And stretch them to the other side. All right, now we're going to stretch to fit and pin. All right, so now you're going to stitch all the way around using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, now starting at the side seam at 1/2 inch seam allowance, you're going to stitch all the way around. And you're going to stretch a little bit so everything can be flush. As you go around. Back stitch at the end. Now we're going to attach the cuff, the sleeve cuff. You should have cut one piece of fabric if you're going to do one sleeve that needs the cuff. So with right sides facing, the sides that have the notches on each side, you're going to fold that together, and you're going to match the notches, and you're going to pin and you're going to stitch a 1/2 inch straight across. Then after that, and let me demonstrate what's going to happen afterwards. So I'm gonna use these pins as my seam allowance. Then you're going to fold. Make sure your seam allowance is flat, and you're going to fold it at those 2 notches together on the wrong sides, and you're going to flip it to the right side. So it's going to look like this. And this is your cuff. This is how it's going to go. Okay? So let me take this apart. So you're going to stitch a 1/2 inch right across where those notches are. So now you're going to take your cuff at the seam allowance with wrong sides together, and you're going to place them together, and then you're going to flip your cuff. Your wrong sides together, and your right side will be facing you. So now we're going to edge stitch the cuff closed before we attach it to the end of the wrist part of the sleeve. Start at your side seam and stitch all the way around. Use 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Just like that. Now with your sleeve, with the wrong side facing you, you're going to take your cuff with the right sides of the fabric facing you, and with the seam matching the edge of your wrist of your sleeve, you're going to place the seam allowance together of the cuff and the edge of the sleeve, and you're going to pin. Stitch. Now I'm going to serge this off so it'll look better, just like I serged the side seams. Okay, now that you have added your cuff to your sleeve, I'm gonna tack that down later so it can look a little better. But yeah, looking good so far. Now we're going to attach, to finish our bodice piece, now we're going to attach our neck piece. So with pattern piece number 6, which is your neckband, you should have cut one on a fold. And you're going to attach with right sides facing. You're going to attach the side seams together and stitch a 1/2 inch straight across. And then we're going to fit to stretch, but we're going to put the side seam at the shoulder seam. Now we're going to close this together by matching the seams with wrong sides facing. We're going to fold it and we're going to do an edge stitch using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So you're going to match the side seam of your neckband to the shoulder seam. And you're going to put it with right sides facing inside the circumference of your neck area. And then you're going to stretch it to the other shoulder. And you're going to pin, and you're going to do the same thing like you did for the band, the waistband of the shirt. And now you're going to fit it, stretch to fit. You're going to pin as you go, stretch and pin, stretch and pin. Okay, now you're going to stitch a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. Now starting at the seam of the neckband, at the shoulder seam, you're going to put your needle down in that seam and stitch all the way around using 1/2 inch seam allowance. Back stitch, and stretch to fit. And back stitch. Okay, now I did a edge stitch, top stitch around the front of my my neckband to secure my serge, the serge part of the neckband down. I also did it with the cuff, and I did also stitch down the serge, the edge around the sleeve with the ties to make it, you know, a little bit neater. You can leave your serge edge, you don't have to top stitch down your serge edge. You can leave that as is, but that's my little detail that I did on my own. Now we're going to insert the elastic band around the waist edge of the waistband. inside the waistband, where that opening that I told you to leave open, that's where we're going to insert your elastic. Now you should get 1.5 inches width of elastic to insert in between the band. I wrapped it around my waist to give the feel of not so tight. I didn't want it so tight, so I just fit it around the circumference of my waist, and I'm going to stitch 1/2 inch across the seam to close it after I fish it through your band. So that's what I'm gonna do now. Go all the way around and make sure that it's flat, because you want your band to be flat. You want your elastic to be flat. Okay, now I'm going to sew these two together using 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to go back and forth a couple times, across, back and forth a couple times, so it won't, you know, stretch apart, to give it a better secure stitch. Cross it a couple times, back stitch, secure. The only thing you have to do to close it shut is to slip stitch this closed, and that'll be it. Okay, now that we have inserted the elastic around the waist of the top, now only thing you have to do now is slip stitch the opening closed where we inserted the elastic, and that is it with the top. Now let's work on the pants. Now with pattern piece number 9, the front pant, you should have cut out 2 pieces of fabric. Now by taking both pieces with right sides facing, you're going to pin from the top center front of the pants to the crotch. Now I'm doing a top stitching close to the edge on the center front of the pants. Okay, now that we have attached the 2 front pant pieces at the center front. Now we're going to work on the pocket pieces, which is pattern piece number 11. You should have cut out 2 pieces of fabric and 2 pieces of lining. We're first going to work with the lining pieces by attaching them to the front of the pants on the side seams. Now you're going to take the lining pieces of the pocket and place them right sides facing on each side at the side seam of the front of the pants. Now that you have positioned your pocket lining pieces on the side seams of the front of the pants, you're going to pin at the very top edge of the pocket and pin at the very bottom edge of the pocket at the bottom dot. And then you're going to stitch using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, securing both pocket linings down. Now we're going to work on the back pieces of the pants. So take pattern piece number 10, which is the back pant. You should have cut 2 pieces of fabric. Now with right sides together, you're going to pin the center back of the pants from the top waist to the crotch. Now by attaching the 2 pieces of fabric for the back of the pants, you're going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance to attach the center back. Okay, now that you have attached your back pants at the center back, now we're going to attach the pockets on the sides. So take your fabric pieces of your pocket, pattern piece number 11, and attach each to the sides by matching the dots that you've marked on your pattern pieces. Match your notches. This is a very easy pattern to put together. I think it is for beginners as well. Now you're going to stitch both sides using a 1/2 inch seam allowance to attach your pockets to the back of your pants on the side seam. Okay, now that you have added your pockets to the sides of the back of the pants, now we're going to lay the front of the pants right sides facing over top of each pocket. And let's work with one side because after you do this side, you're going to do the other side the same way. So the markings that you put on the side of the pants for the pocket opening, the first two dots and the bottom dot, you're going to match your side seam. Match your side seams together, and you're going to pin on the side and at the bottom notch. And now you're going to pin off, okay? And also pin at the bottom dot of the pocket. And also pin on the side seam of the pants legs. Down to the hem, matching your notches. Okay, now that you have pinned, you're going to stitch down from those two top dots on the sides of your pants for your pocket. You're going to stitch those down, and that's going to be a ½ inch seam allowance. Then you're going to stitch on top of the pocket 3/8 inch stitch using a ½ inch seam allowance all the way around the side and the bottom of the pocket to that bottom dot. And then you're going to leave your needle down into the bottom dot at the pocket, and you're going to pivot using a ½ inch seam allowance all the way down the side seam of the pant leg to the hem. And you're going to do that for both sides. So now first we're going to put the needle down at that first dot of your pocket. And we're going to stitch to the dot below that one, back stitch as well. You're going to back stitch at the bottom of that dot. Now you're going to stitch across the top of the pocket, 3/8 inch seam allowance, back stitch. Right. Leave the needle in, lift your pressure foot up and just pivot. And you're going to stitch a ½ inch seam allowance from there all the way around. You're going to stitch that at the bottom of the dot of the pocket. Lift your pressure foot up and pivot your pants leg. Put your pressure foot down and stitch ½ inch seam allowance all the way down to the hem. And back stitch. Okay, now that you have attached your front and your back of your pants and also stitched around your pocket, I also serged around my pocket pieces. Now we're going to attach the inner seam of the pants. I've already pinned each leg, starting at the notches and at the hem, and also pinning at the crotch, and then pinning the open areas of your inner seam. And I'm going to stitch using a ½ inch seam allowance from hem all the way around to the other hem of the leg. Starting at the bottom hem of one of your legs, you're going to stitch using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you're going to back stitch at the hem as well. Okay, now that you have finished stitching the inner seam of your pants, now we're going to tack down the pockets on the very front pieces. You would see 2 notches here on each side, and that's where you're going to lay the edge of the pocket down and pin, because you're going to tack this down. You're doing an edge stitch and tacking the pocket down to the edge of the pants at the waist. And you're going to tack it down using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now that you have tacked down your pockets at the front edge of your pants, stopping at those notches, now we're going to work on the waistband of the pants. You would need pattern piece number 12 and number 13, which is the front pants waistband. You should cut 1 on the fold, and the back waistband, you should have cut 1 on the fold as well. And for the front of your pants waistband, there is a marking for your grommet that you would put here, or instead of using a grommet, you can also use the buttonhole stitching. So you could bring your drawstring through. You don't have to use a drawstring for your waistband. I'm also going to use 1/2 inch wide elastic as well, so I can have a more tight and secure waistband. So you would need some interfacing to put there at the grommet, where you're going to put your grommet. So just interfacing just to secure to make your fabric stronger around where you're going to put your grommets. And I just used maybe 2-inch wide square of interfacing to put here on my fabric on the wrong sides, because this is where these dots are where I'm going to put my grommet. If I wanted to put a grommet, I will probably use a buttonhole stitch here for the opening for my drawstring. So with right sides facing, you're going to take both pieces and face them on top of each other. We'll face them together. And you also have notches. So for the front and the back, I don't have to make any markings determining which fabric goes in the back or which fabric goes in the front, because on the side of pattern pieces 12 and 13, you have dot markings where you're going to insert your elastic, just like pattern pieces 7 and 8 from the bodice waistband. Now the pants waistbands are marked the same with those dots, and you follow the same steps like you did with your bodice waistband. I'm gonna stop at the dot, at the where the notch is for the middle of the fold line. I'm going to backstitch, I'm sorry, backstitch. Cut my thread, and then I'm going to leave that opening there that I put for my elastic, and I'm going to stitch a 1/2 inch to the edge for my seam allowance. Backstitch. Okay, so this is where I'm going to insert my elastic. And now for the other side, I'm just going to make a continuous stitch using 1.5 inches for my seam allowance. Now, before you close your waistband up, I'm going to make some buttonhole stitching at my markings, so for my drawstring. So just make, or you can add grommets, like I said before, you can add grommets, but if you add grommets, make sure you enforce it with some interfacing on the wrong side. But I'm going to use buttonhole stitching. Now with my buttonhole spacer, I'm going to use a 1/2 inch size button. So I'm just going to attach my buttonhole foot. And add my buttonhole stitch. And just adjust the stitching length to 0.3 millimeter. And I would like for my buttonhole stitches to go vertical instead of horizontal. So let me get my measuring tape, and I'm going to make this buttonhole with a 1/2 inch wide. So I'm gonna stop it here at 1/4 and there. All right, and from those top dot and bottom dot, that's where I'm going to begin my stitch and end for my buttonhole. there's one buttonhole there, and I'm going to do the other side. Here's the other buttonhole. So that is for my drawstring. Okay, now that you have attached your buttonhole stitches, if you use them, or your grommets, now we're going to fold this in half with wrong sides facing. The opening of your band, you're going to stitch it using 3/8 of an inch all the way around to close it in. Okay, for the pants waistband, now that you have stitched the edge closed using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, we're now going to insert the waistband in between the pants opening with the front facing you, on the wrong side. We're going to insert the waistband with right sides facing each other. So with the grommet or buttonholes facing you, insert that opening with the edge of the pants and make sure it's inside of the pants. And with the center front seam, make sure you put it in between the center front of where the buttonholes or the grommet holes will go, and then your pin. You can also make a notch marking when you have your pattern pieces cut out, and then after you pin it there, because when you have the right sides facing you, it will look like that when you put the pants on. Okay, so let's pin the side seams together, making sure the side seams are matching. To start my stitching at the side seam and stitch a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. Back stitch. Now I'm going to serge this excess fabric off at my seam allowance. And then I'm going to turn it over and do an edge stitch to tack the seam allowance down. Now that you have attached your pants waistband, we're now going to insert the elastic. Now you're going to stitch your elastic all the way across the edge. Now from the straight stitch, I'm going to change it to the zigzag stitch for it to be enforced a little better. Okay, now that you have encased your elastic in your pants waistband, you're going to slip stitch the opening closed, and then we're going to work on the hem of the pants. Now at the bottom hem of the pants, you should have 2 notches on each side. At those notches, you're going to fold the pants leg or the pants hem with wrong sides facing inside the pants, and you're going to stitch the top edge of the hem 3/8 of an inch. But first you can pin it to make sure that it doesn't move when you start stitching, when you start sewing it closed. And the hem should be 1.5 inches width. And you can take a ruler and make sure that all the way around is the same width. Okay, now you're going to stitch it closed at the very top of the edge of the hem, 3/8 away from the edge. Back stitch. Well, we're all done. I attached my drawstring and I also finished the hem of the pants. And I hope you enjoyed this tutorial of putting the Sassy Sweatsuit together. Stay tuned for my upcoming tutorials and videos, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on this tutorial and future tutorials to come. So take care, guys, and enjoy.